Welcome to Grail Country. We're here in this is going to be our sixth episode of our Meditations on the Divine Comedy series. We are now up to Canto 6 of the Inferno. Ted is back with us this week after doing a walking pilgrimage in Oklahoma last week, which just sounds like great fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hope you had a nice time to reflect. Ted is going to be our reader this week. Without any further ado, we're going to jump right into Canto 6. Let me just get my screen share here so that our audience can see the.
Looking good. I can see it.
All right, here we go.
All right. Canto 6 of the Divine Comedy. My senses had reeled from me out of pity for the sorrow of those kinsmen and lost lovers. Now they return, and waking gradually, I see new torments and new souls in pain about me everywhere. Wherever I turn away from grief, I turn to grief again. I'm in the third circle of the torments. Here, to all time, with neither pause nor change, the frozen rain of hell descends in torrents. Huge hailstones, dirty water, and black snow pour from the dismal air to putrefy the putrid slush that waits for them below. Here, monstrous Cerberus, the ravening beast, howls through his triple throats like a mad dog over the spirits sunk in that foul paste. His eyes are red, his beard is greased with phlegm, his belly is swollen, and his hands are claws to rip the wretches and flay and mangle them. And they too howl like dogs in the freezing storm, turning and turning from it as if they thought one naked side could keep the other warm. When Cerberus discovers us in that swill, his dragon jaws yawned wide, his lips drew back in a grin of fangs. No limb of him was still. My guide bent down and seized in either fist a clod of that stinking dirt that festered there, and flung them down the gullet of the beast. As a hungry cur will set the echoings raving, and then falls still when he has thrown a bone, all of his clamor being in his craving, so the three ugly heads of Cerberus, whose yowling at those wretches deafened them, choked on their putrid sops and stopped their fuss. We made our way across the sodden mess of souls the rain beat down, and when our steps fell on a body, they sank through emptiness. All those illusions of being seemed to lie drowned in the slush until one wraith among them sat up abruptly and called as I passed by. O you who are led this journey through the shade of hell's abyss, do you recall this face? You had been made before I was unmade. And I, perhaps the pain you suffer here distorts your image from my recollection. I do not know you as you now appear. And he to me, your own city, so rife with hatred that the bitter cup flows over, was mine too in that other clearer life. Your citizens nicknamed me Chiaco, the hog. Gluttony was my offense, and for it I lie here rotting like a swollen log. Nor am I lost in these alone. All these you see about you in this painful death have wallowed in the same indecencies. And I answered him, Chiaco, your agony weighs on my heart and calls my soul to tears. But tell me, if you can, what it is to be for the citizens of that divided state, and whether there are honest men among them, and for what reasons we are torn by hate. And he then, after many words given and taken, it shall come to blood. White shall rise over black and rout the dark lord's force, battered and shaken. Then it shall come to pass within 3 suns that the fallen shall arise, and by the power of one now gripped by many hesitations, black shall ride on white for many years, loading it down with burdens and oppressions, and humbling of proud names and helpless tears. 2 are honest, but none will heed them. Their pride, avarice, and envy are the tongues men know and heed, a babble of despair. Here he broke off his mournful prophecy, and I to him, still let me urge you on to speak a little further and instruct me. Farnada and Tigayo, men of good blood, Jacopo Rusticucci, Arrigo Mosca, and the others who set their hearts on doing good. Where are they now, whose high deeds might begem the crown of kings? I long to know their fate. Does heaven soothe or hell envenom them? And they lie below in a blacker lair. The heavier guilt draws them to greater pain. If you descend so far, you may see them there. But when you move again among the living, oh, speak my name to the memory of men. Having answered all, I say no more. And giving his head a shake, he looked up at my face cross-eyed, then bowed his head and fell away among the other blind souls of that place. And my guide to me, he will not wake again until the angel trumpet sounds the day on which the host shall come to judge all men. Then shall each soul before the seat of mercy return to its sad grave and flesh and form to hear the edict of eternity. So we picked our slow way among the shades and the filthy rain, speaking of life to come. Master, I said, when the great clarion fades into the voice of thundering omniscience, what of these agonies? Will they be the same or more or less after the final sentence? And he to me, look to your science again, where it is written, the more a thing is perfect, the more it feels of pleasure and of pain. As for these souls, though they can never soar to true perfection, still in the new time they will be nearer it than they were before. And so we walked the rim of the great ledge, speaking of pain and joy, and of much more that I will not repeat, and reached the edge where the descent begins. Then suddenly we came on Plutus, the great enemy.
Well, well, well.
Indeed.
So nice.
Nice.
I'm just kidding.
It's I mean, it's definitely grabs you. The imagery is very strong.
Oh man.
I don't know if I would say nice though.
I
that
was being sarcastic.
Interesting that you chose the sort of church Latin pronunciation. Because I learned when I learned Latin, I learned classical Latin, and it's Cerberus.
Well,
in classical Latin, but you went with it's Italian, so it's appropriate, right?
Yeah.
My father-in-law in Switzerland worked for a company named Cerberus, and that's how they said it, Cerberus.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
That's the name of the company
in Switzerland.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrangle it out of my I mean, my immediate thing is like Spanish, and so I would have pronounced it Cerberus for a long time until I think someone corrected me.
Oh, it's definitely not. I mean, it's definitely not Cerberus. It's like the way you pronounced it. You said Cerberus, which would be Italian or Church Latin pronunciation.
Well, how do you pronounce Cicero? Is that Latin?
Yes, it is, but it's not Cicero because there's no in classical Latin. There are no soft C's.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
it would be
same with or Chiaco the hog. Yeah. Which is just Latin for
but that Italian in Italian it is there. You do have that soft the ch sound. That's in Italian, but not classical Latin.
Yeah.
We're gonna read David's. All right, let's read.
I'm gonna read Canto 6.
Oh, wonderful! Yeah,
it's called Hungering. Inferno, Canto 6. Wakened by the hungry growls of a dog, I see the worm condemned to eat the dust. Ravenous it growls, its talons flog the sinners known to us as gluttonous. He snarls and slobbers over their wicked souls, infernal tripart beast, old Cerberus. If only I could hunger for my goal, hungering for justice and the right, the way these sinners hungered for their bowl, I would not need this journey into the night.
Okay, can I lead off with something I've been meditating on for the last couple of weeks?
Go for it.
Yeah,
of course.
Okay, so I spent some time. There's this wonderful retired Catholic professor called Dr. Fagerberg, and he's got some beautiful stuff on asceticism. He's got a book called Liturgical Asceticism that Corey Cobal's reading, and he's done a bunch of lectures on it. He's got a great lecture called Asceticism in the Chronicles of Narnia, which is just, I mean, he's an old lit professor, and so he's just so much fun to listen to. At any rate, since I listened to those lectures at the beginning of this year, sort of the beginning of the summer, I've been thinking a lot about asceticism. As he says, Christianity without asceticism is like pancakes without eggs. You've got milk and flour, but it's not pancakes. And so he talks about asceticism, right? Because it's training, right? It's to be trained, and so I think you can think of there's one way to think of asceticism as sort of the formal notion in the church of fasting, prayer, and almsgiving, right? That we particularly in penitential seasons of Lent and Advent. But then there's asceticism more broadly, which is having something that orders your appetites.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I was reflecting on is that asceticism is actually, first of all, we've usually had it forced on us for most of history, just we just haven't had enough stuff to not have to regulate our appetites. You just can't eat as much as you want. You can't sleep with as many people as you want. You can't yell at people without them punching you in the face, and on and on and on. But now we're in this weird place where it's like we've had these like things have opened up so that now you can have something like that. And I've realized that asceticism is actually a basic component of sanity. Like if you're going to, if you take any of your desires and you just embrace it as much as it is in you, like you'll go insane. Like you'll cease to be able to think, because there's this sort of recursive thing of you feed an appetite and it grows, and you feed an appetite and it grows. And you can see this in people and certainly in myself, where it's like even something like the desire for the appetite for like information, right? Or like entertainment, there's all of these different appetites that we have that if you just follow them, eventually you'll cease to exist as like a rational creature. And so this struck me as being really connected with, it's like why is the gluttons next? And there's a lot of reasons that they're there, but I think in terms of thinking about our journey into hell as this being falling away from goodness and being, this notion that to have, what are the gluttonous? They're like those who didn't order their appetites. Like fundamentally, that's what it is to be gluttonous. It's not to desire things. To desire things is good and right and natural and supernatural. And I think David's poem there is wonderful. If I had hungered for, what does he say, Sherry? If I'd hungered for justice and something else, that was such a beautiful pair of lines.
If only I could hunger for my goal, hungering for justice and the right, the way these sinners hungered for their bowl, I would not
Yes.
need in the night.
Yes, like that's so. I love that. I mean, that's exactly it. It's Dante gets painted as this sort of sour puss, and everyone loves that really like dour picture of him frowning, that profile painting. But like Dante is a poet who understood that desire is not to be eliminated; it's to be ordered to, right, to your goal. Right. If I had hungered for my goal, that is to say my perfection, right? Like if I'd hungered for my perfection the way these sinners hunger for their bowl, it's like
Mm-hmm.
the answer is not to not hunger. And then
Not
this is
to not hunger. I'm just trying to.
That's not the goal. Yeah, sorry, that's a bad way to phrase
Double
it.
negative.
You're not.
Well, right. It goes back
Confused.
it goes back to what I was saying before we started recording, when I was talking about like, and I brought it up last week too. It's like this idea. I recently I went to go see Jordan Daniel Wood give a lecture at Mount Angel, and he was working with a letter of Saint Maximus the Confessor, where Maximus is saying essentially he had two different things. He was saying that there are three things that we can desire. We can desire God, we can desire the world, or we can desire nature. And he also says that we become what we desire. So, and although the desire for nature is higher than the desire for the world, because it includes everything that is natural, because it includes everything that is naturally good and all possible natural virtues, right? Like say the desire to be courageous, for example,
or just.
It's still right. It's still inadequate, which is kind of like what you can see reflected in Dante. Like what if we go back a couple of cantos, that was why in the Garden of Limbo, like despite all the perfections, that's why it was like still insufficient. That's why there was still that light that was present that was beckoning them to what they missed. That's higher still.
Yeah.
So, and this also is why asceticism, by the way, right?
Yes, so, exactly.
Because it is asceticism is actually about training your desire. It's not about not desiring. It's about training your desire toward God.
It's exactly what Emil Bock talks about when he says you have to bridle the Luciferic and the Harmonic, right? Because the Luciferic delivers up to the Harmonic, and they aren't to be destroyed, like eliminated, but they're to be bridled. And to me, that's always pointed towards asceticism. And the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, right? And we have to practice that, because we can't know it if we don't do it, right? We can't know what we're capable of living without until we actually live without it.
So, this pilgrimage, this is the second year that I've done it. It's just a 2-day walking pilgrimage, but the first day is like we walked 23 miles, and both years I thought, oh, I'm going to train, I'm going to get some walking in for this. It's going to be great, and then I just get slammed with work because the fall's really busy for me. So like this year, I sat in an excavator for 40 hours, 50 hours a week for the several weeks leading up to it, and it really hurt to walk that far. And exactly what you're saying, Sherry.
Was it 23 miles in a day, or
23 miles in a day, and then it's 12 miles the second day and a half day? Yeah. And what's so interesting is that I have this notion of how much I can suffer for something that's good, and then you get out there and you're just like, your legs are cramping to high heaven, but you can keep doing it. And it's like, because I put myself in this place of discomfort, right? So then I've got this desire for rest, right? And ease. It's like, those are good things. Rest and ease are good things, but now I'm given this opportunity to sacrifice that, give that up to something higher, which is this spiritual act of worship of walking, which is really cool that walking has become an act of worship and devotion. But it's exactly that, is this moment you asceticism puts you in this place where now you get to choose up above nature.
But I would even say,
here's the thing I would say. Oh, go ahead. Sure, go ahead. I'm sorry. We both started talking at the same time, but you go first.
Well, I was just thinking that the principle of asceticism in ordering your appetites or your desires, could have also applied to you, Ted, perfectly well in your excavator, right? Because your desire was to walk and practice and be ready. And you weren't able to do that. And this is how, for me, how I sacramentalize everything, right? And whenever I come up against the thing that I don't want to do, I don't want to be doing this, I have something else in mind, then I sacramentalize it by first of all, giving thanks, being grateful, right? There's always a good reason. Like yesterday, I stood in the kitchen from 12:30 till 7:30 cutting meat because we butchered 2 sheep. And I was just like, when they did it, they dropped it in the dirt. So it was just like,
oh gosh, that's so painful.
It's so brutal. Like with a knife, little, anyway.
Oh yeah. I'm actually going to go slaughter hogs after this. So
so I was just thinking to myself the whole time, well, first of all, I got angry with the people who did it. And then I had to say, no, I'm grateful that they did this. And, like you're just constantly bumping up into these things, right? And it's easy to forget that everything is sacred. It's so, especially when you're not in a good mood or you're frustrated. You're frustrated, right? Like you're frustrated in your excavator because your plans are frustrated, right?
Yeah.
But you can so easily, and that is an act of asceticism, not indulging in that very thing.
Yes.
Right? It just it's what do you call that? It's it's procreative. It gives birth to more and more asceticism, more and more sacramentalism, more and more grace, right? More gratitude.
When you do it properly, it also returns your desires, lower desires, back to you.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
That's the thing.
It's the principle of abundance versus scarcity, Nate, like essentially, right? Because you can think about what you don't have all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But when you turn it around like that, suddenly your life becomes so abundant. I'm thinking about how I don't want to pick all this dirt out of this meat.
Yeah, there's I need to go back and read them again. So I used to really, when I was younger, I really hated Kierkegaard. And that stuck with me for a long time. Like I immediately loathed Kierkegaard upon reading him. Like he challenged me in ways.
I loathe Kierkegaard. He's so cute.
Cute? Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh! Like, Fear and Trembling enraged me. Enraged me when I read it as a teenager. It made me so mad. And I actually I reread it. I reread it recently for a for one of my gaming conversations, believe it or not.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I
Amazing.
know. Because because the guy I was talking to, he like had this mapping of different D&D races to Kierkegaard's Toad in the Swamp, Night of Infinite Resignation, and the Night of Faith. Like, so he like,
Yeah.
and so it's like, oh, okay, in order to understand his framing, I should probably reread it. So I reread it in preparation for that. And I still, the Abraham bits, I still have trouble with. But to the point of what Sherry was just talking about, there's this bit where he talks about like the Night of Faith, like, even though he's a poor man, he's imagining that his wife he's just absolutely 100% confident that his wife has cooked him this like wonderful meal, and he's going to go home and this meal is going to be waiting for him. And he gets home, and of course the meal that he had imagined is not what's actually served, but he's super grateful for the meal that his wife has actually served him anyway. Like, he's just as happy as that as he was for the thing that he had imagined, and just as pleasantly surprised by it, and treats it just as much as a miracle.
That's yeah, it's that capacity. Well, and so much of Paralandra deals with this too, right? It's, how do you let go of the imagined good for the actual good, right? Like that's so much of the battle that goes on there. No, Nate, I think weren't you also pointing at like what Pajot brought up? He's like, who enjoys their meal more, the millionaire sitting down to his, umpteenth luxurious meal, or the monk who's been fasting for 3 days who sits down to a piece of bread, right? There's this, I mean, that's like the trick. The trick is that if you rest all the time, you feel tired and you can't enjoy your rest. But then if you work really hard and do a bunch of stuff, and you're like so grateful to sit down. And to come back to Canto 6, I mean, one of the things that struck me is just this disgusting, is this like, they're basically, it's just like muddy, nasty, probably crappy slush is like falling down on them, and they're just rolling in it, and they eat it. Like Cerberus eats it. And so there's this weird thing about unbridled appetites, which, first of all, so we've got another dog, right? We had those two dogs at the beginning, and the greyhound definitely is there. Sorry, the wolf is definitely down in the very pits. What's interesting is like Cerberus it's like three heads, so three throats, but like there's no intelligence to it. It's like just like multiplied appetite. It's like the consuming part of a person made, sort of manifest in this monstrous absurdity. But like he eats garbage, right? Virgil throws
Mud.
stinking dirt. He throws mud, and like Cerberus is so gluttonous he just eats the mud. And there's this weird thing of when you become like, we've done this as a society with sugar, like big time, where we can't even taste sugar anymore. And we can't taste sugar because we put it in everything. And if you cut it out of your diet, all of a sudden you realize these things that didn't seem sweet before now like really sweet, like fruit, lots of fruit that just seems bland. Like you could cut a lot of like refined sugars out of your diet. You're like, oh, there's like a meat tastes sweet. Like you read these old descriptions of especially medieval writings, and they talk about meat being sweet. You're like, when was the last time I tasted meat? And I was like, this is sweet. It's like, yeah, because we blasted our appetites with these sort of like simulacra, this hyper reality.
Even to an American, unless your palate is dead, Iberico pork is sweet.
Yes, this is true. This is true. But I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? There's this weird thing where like when you embrace that when you just give yourself over to that desire, you actually can't even enjoy it anymore. There's this is one of the ironies, like he who would save his life will lose it, and he who will lose his life will save it, right? Absolutely, right. On the supernatural, but like also on the natural level too. It's going on at the same time. And when you embrace your just the animal aspect of yourself, right? When you're just the animal appetites and your animal soul, you actually cease to even be able to appreciate that as a rational creature. It like to be able to enjoy being an animal requires your rationale, your human, the spiritual aspect of yourself being alive enough to appreciate it. And so then, and if you don't, then you'll just end up in the mud eating crap.
Right.
Eating,
Well,
eating
you know,
any-
okay.
eating anything.
I mean,
Yeah. I mean that on every level, from literal food to all the way up,
right.
wherever you want
It's
to put
funny
that.
because when we were reading this part about Cerberus and his eyes are red, his beard is greased with phlegm, his belly is swollen. We got a boneyard, so we took the carcasses down to the boneyard and the innards and everything, and threw them in the boneyard. And the dogs just go down there and they just park themselves. And yesterday, one of my dogs came up and she had the most disgusting. I knew she had something in her mouth, but I didn't know what it was. But the stuff that was hanging out, and she walks right over to me and looks at me, and it's just this. It looked like brown foam. I'm just like, get away. And they're just laying around with swollen bellies. They're just like they're total gluttons at the moment.
Yeah. I gotta say, so just to be very personal for a moment, it's like, obviously I am a big guy and I like to cook and entertain, but it is not my cooking and entertaining that leads to my excess body size. Because I, like, when I've been thinner, I've also done those things too. Like, that's just a part of who I am, and that's done from a place of, like, that's done out of that is absolutely done out of love and joy. It is the things that I thoughtlessly put into my body without thought. I mean, just without, just the thoughtlessly put into my body, like when I'm hurried.
Yeah.
It's invariably what I consume when I do not have time.
Yeah.
When I do not have time to treat the food as an artistic endeavor, which is what I'm prone to do when I do have the time. When it ceases to be an artistic endeavor and it's just like, oh, right now I'm hungry, I need to eat something, I don't have time. And I'm kind of resentful of the fact that I don't have time and that I can't do anything. And it's like, so I just whatever, or the chips that you're eating when you're sitting on the couch watching television with your spouse, like that kind of thing. Like that's where the excess body weight comes from. It's not from the actually, usually when I've been cooking all day, it's like the last thing I'm going to do is overeat when I sit down to eat with my guests.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to. So it's really it's like, it's more like, oh, I'm working through without a lunch and I don't have time through the day and I don't have time for a real lunch break. So I'm just going to grab like whatever that I can grab in like 5 minutes from the fridge and throw it together and eat it.
Yeah.
And eat it quickly because I don't have time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And I heard this rabbi once, and this is interesting. This rabbi was talking about gluttony, but he was saying that, like, and this I can't help but think of Chesterton, because I think that one of the reasons that Chesterton is not a saint already is because he was a big guy like me. He was a big guy too. He was over 6 feet tall. Like, he was a big guy. So, and I think he probably should be. And I think that's what this rabbi said. It is to the point. He's like, yes, like, certainly gluttony is a problem, but you shouldn't. But he's like, not everyone who is large-bodied is a glutton.
No.
He's like, and he said, no, this is what he said. He said there are some souls that are so big-souled and
they
so
need large
full
bodies.
of joy and life that they need more food.
That sounds like Chesterton.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly. So I offer that in defense of Chesterton, that maybe he was just a large-souled person,
Well, he definitely wasn't. So
And we
are
should
you.
not let his body size prevent him from being a saint. So
That's amazing. There's 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 just so much in here. Again, I don't know, something particularly in going through the Commedia with you two, I keep being struck by every time Dante deals with the brokenness of souls. I'm always getting it as the shadow of glory of the redeemed and deified soul, right?
Yes.
The tragedy, the tragedy of Chiako wallowing in the mud. Like you don't look at a pig and think, oh, it's so sad that it's in the mud. Maybe you like feel a little bit bad if it's like really cold and rainy, and you'd like, it'd be nice if it had like a dry hut to be under or something like that. But like, there's not that much tragedy to it. The tragedy of Chiako in the mud is that he could have been a a vessel of the divine Trinity, right? And like radiating God's glory through the universe. Like that's why it's a tragedy. So there's this weird thing of like, in as much as like we're walking in the darkness, I always see it as like it's the shadow exists because of the possible goodness, the goodness that should be hoped for, that could be hoped for, and again, depending on the
Well, how
valence of how
about
you
this?
read this.
Tell me
Yeah,
what you think.
go
Tell
for
me
it,
what you
Sherry.
think of this, Ted, because like, okay, so first of all, I want to say that I think most poets, they see into things. Okay. So they see
Mm,
the poetic relations, right? They see the thing for what it really is, and I'll just use George MacDonald's Snowdrop as an illustration, that it is the snowdrop. Like he says, science can tear it apart, but they'll never see um, pale confidence, submission, and hope. Okay. That's what the snowdrop is. And that's what a
mm,
poet sees.
mm,
Okay.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Dante's a poet, and he's in hell, and he's walking through, and he sees these people. So let's take him out of hell. Let's take him to his writing desk. He's seen all these people. He's writing this down. And where did he see them? In his everyday life. He saw them doing these things in his everyday life. He saw the fact that they weren't who they were supposed to be. And because of that, they were in hell. Okay.
Yeah,
They were trying
yeah.
to find some kind of satisfaction with who they thought they were, instead of striving to be who they really are.
That's really good, Sherry. I want to say
Sherry,
something.
oh my goodness.
That's really good. I want to draw attention to one line that Chiako utters,
Yeah.
because I just had a conversation. I don't know if either of you have had a chance to see it yet, but I just recorded a conversation that aired yesterday with Jed and Dr. Chris Green.
Yeah, I watched it.
And we talked about Bulgako's eschatology. And you remember me bringing up memory in that conversation? Okay. And I talked a little bit about the way I think about memory, definitely influenced by Tom Berg, and because if forgetting, sleep, and death are related, then that means that memory is connected to wakefulness and life, because
Yes.
it's a counterpoint. And so with that in mind, Chiako, a soul in hell, says to Dante, "But when you move again among the living, oh, speak my name to the memory of men." Why does he say that?
I highlighted that. Because you are nothing if you are not remembered.
I mean, come on.
If you're not remembered, to me anyway, if you're not remembered, you don't exist. We talked about this in the book.
And as long as you are remembered, you do exist.
That's right. Like, so the thing about having children in ancient culture was to be remembered, because if you don't have children, you're not remembered, so you don't exist.
Yeah, as I thought. So there's a way in which, yeah. So this is very, very ancient, and this is certain. You see, this is the obsession of the classical age, right? It's to
Yes,
be
that's
to
right.
have a name that is remembered. Like,
Yes.
so you see this, and I mean, this isn't Homer, right? So this is like very, very ancient. But there,
Hmm.
but Christianity, I think, takes this idea of remembrance and, like, which is very, very finite for the classical age, right? The idea of remembrance that they have, which is just to have like an honored name that is remembered, and makes it deeper. If you remember
Yes.
in that conversation, I wanted to draw attention to Christ saying, in instituting the Eucharist, do this in remembrance of me.
Hmm.
And so there is, like,
Oh
that
my
idea of
goodness.
memory, when you put it in a Christian, in a Christian, when you Christianize it, it becomes deeper. And I think that this is what Chiaco is asking, because he would have, I mean, he's in hell, but he was still raised in a Christian age and a Christian culture. And so I don't think what he's reflecting there is merely the memory of his name, although he does say, speak my name to the memory of men. But it's something, but it also hints to something deeper than that. And that is hinted at a little bit later in the Canto, when Dante is the most audacious he's been yet at what he's been hinting at all along. As for these souls, though they can never soar to true perfection, still in the new time they will be nearer it than they were before.
I also highlighted, and he said to me, look to your science again where it is written, the more a thing is perfect, the more it feels of pleasure and of pain.
That's, well,
And
there's a
this
lot there.
this kind of yeah, I know. There's a ton of stuff in there. And the thing about perfect here is it's not perfect as in sinless. It's perfect as in complete,
Complete. Yes,
whole.
that's exactly right. Well, there's a tremendous amount of, like, the veneration of the Blessed Virgin pulling from this, right? This notion that she was the most perfect person. And so when we look at her life, like like the veneration of Our Lady of Sorrows, the notion being that, like, of all people, she suffered the most at the cross because of her perfection.
Mhm.
It's the idea that to be, the more, like, complete you are, the more whole you are, does not actually protect you from pain in this life. It actually makes you more vulnerable to it. Um, that you guys have just been dropping depth charges in my brain over and over for the last, like, 5 minutes. A couple of things. One,
Oh yeah, and I'm like, there are depth charges for me too. It's like, I don't even pretend to know what I'm saying here. I'm just telling you what is setting up, what is lighting up
yeah.
my intuition and saying, hey, there's something here. Let's dig into this together.
So
I
I
want
would
to
point out,
before we sail away too far from the idea of the Lady of Sorrows, I wanted
yeah.
to read this really quickly. This is from a Substack called False Mirror by Stuart Lundy. He says, to be told by your mother, we got along until you learned how to speak, gives a perfect image of the imperfections of motherhood. My life has been like staring at the color orange long enough that there's an after image of blue. Is this Marian cyanide a blessing or a delusion? Do I taste almonds in the bath of Bana? She, and he's referring to Mary, she is every mother you never had, correcting but patient, kind but not doting, forgiving but only of sincere repentance. I know exactly who Mary is because I know so little of who she is. Her vocation is the bitterness of the starry sea because she feels the pain of each of her children, though she is never a source of pain for them. The philosopher Shankara says in a prayer to the Divine Mother for the forgiveness of sins, though bad sons are many, never has there been a bad mother. While this is patently false on the surface, I take this to mean that any bad mothers we encounter are the result of much worse fathers and husbands. Where was Adam when Eve took the fruit? An inattentive Adam is to blame for Eve wandering, not the serpent. A mother is a mirror. Whatever a mother transmutes can barely be perceived because it is the transmitted wounds we feel the most. A bad mother took the brunt of bad fathers, and while she perhaps left what feels like irreparable damage, she took a sword to her own heart. And when I read that, I thought, oh, that's exactly right. Like, this is why Mary is the mother, because that is what the mother does. She takes a sword to her own heart, right? Even if she's not the greatest mother, she still has, to some extent. Anyway, I just wanted to share that because
I'm actually, while you were reading that, I was listening, but I was also scanning the transcript from the conversation that I just recorded, because I know that there was a part in that conversation, and I don't know if I'm not gonna have time to find it, but Chris Green actually said something to the effect of that when you are suffering, your sufferings are greater for Christ than they are for you. That he feels your suffering more than you feel it yourself.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I mean,
Right.
it has to be the case.
I think
that
That Dante's line would necessarily imply that that's the case.
Yes.
was that Nate in the part of the conversation where you guys talked about time and presence?
Yes.
Okay, so that was really interesting to me because I left a comment actually about it, that, you know, the reason, so if you are present in a moment and you're really there, you lose track of time. Okay.
Yes.
And this is exactly why Jesus didn't have the same kind of time that we do, because he never projected himself into the future. Chris mentioned Jesus didn't worry about the Garden of Gethsemane until he was in it. Okay.
Right.
So he wasn't projecting himself into the garden, even though he already knew.
Yes.
He lived precisely in that moment, and that moment is eternity, right?
Yes.
Now is forever.
Right. That's what led me to bring up our loaves and fishes conversation, as when he was talking about that.
Right. Because, and that is again the principle of scarcity and abundance, right? That's where that's the only place that you can know abundance is right there.
Yes.
Is right now.
Yes.
Right. And this is why we say Christ is risen, not Christ was risen.
That's right.
Well, also you have to be, in order to experience abundance, and true feasting, it has to be something that is done in the moment, because it is out of anxiety for the future that we hoard.
Yeah, I know. I'm watching my dog.
We have to have in order to hoard anything, to hoard our love, to hoard our possessions.
And this is why I think he uses Cerberus
to hoard the produce of our fields. All instinct to hoard is out of anxiety for the future, which means that you are not fully living
in the moment.
Can I? Right. Okay, I've got.
You know what the medieval.
Ted's got to get rid of some.
One second, just have to. There's one point I want to bring up. So, in the medieval period, do you know what would happen when there was a surplus of produce? There would be a
rats
feast.
Would come.
A feast.
There would be a feast.
They had no
and it would be, the church would host it, and everybody would come, and the surplus would be shared.
Yeah. Well, and I'm about to go slaughter pigs, and this is what you do. Like, all the organ meat's spoiled. So what you invite all the neighbors over. You just eat the organ meat in the next 2 days, and then someone else slaughters a pig. And in pig season, it's like you're just feasting because you can't store the stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, but let me walk through these. One is with your notions of now and eternity. I cannot remember off the top of my head the short story that the movie Arrival is based off of. Right. First author's first name is Ted. It's a Chinese last name. It's like the window and the something. I can't remember the name of it. You can find it online pretty quickly. Phenomenal meditation on that. It's even better than the movie, and that's one of the best movies I think that's come out in the last 2 decades. The next one, St. Augustine's etymology of remember, right? He looks at it, he says it is to remember, it's to put back together, right? Yeah. And so the thing, when you guys were talking about that in Chiaco, saying, "Speak my name to the memory of men," my first thought was the penitent thief. He says, "Lord, remember me.
Yes.
You come into your kingdom." Christ
That's
looks at him and says, "You will be with me in paradise." Like, for Christ to remember him is to bring him. It's like,
but he knows he's
whoa.
in hell, so he dares not say. So he says, "Just to the world of men," right? So it's like, but
To
there's
the world of
still
men,
some
the thief on the
hopeful.
cross.
But even in this hopeless place, there's still some modicum of hope there.
Okay, and what
And Eva say that.
I want to toss this in here because this is about remembering. So to remember something, right? If I take something that both sides are the same and I remember it, it won't stay together, right? I have to take two opposing things to remember them, right? So like a ball and what's it called now? The hip joint, ball and socket, right? A puzzle piece. If I take two puzzle pieces that are exactly the same and try to remember them, they don't go together, but I need its opposite in order to remember. So I just want to say that because I think it's really important. I listened to a wonderful.
So you're saying that true remembrance is connected to the idea of the coincidence of opposites.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Well, I think that's right because
it's a synthesis.
so this is the one thing that Chris Green said that I did not agree with in the conversation that we just recorded, was he said God has no memory. And if he means that God has no like memory in the sense of recollection of sequential time, obviously that's the case.
Yeah.
But in a deeper sense, like God is memory. Like you exist because God remembers you.
That's right.
Which is why I brought up that it is in fact the one thing that we are promised that God will forget is our sins. Well, why is it that God can forget sins? Because they have only a shadowy, ephemeral, pseudo being in the first place.
Right. And to remember someone is to remember the fullness of their being. You know, like I have seen old people who have lost all their relatives and all their friends. And one of the things they say is no one remembers me, right? They only appear, it makes me sad.
Yeah, it should.
Sorry. They only appear as what they are at that moment. But the fullness of their being is forgotten. Their childhood, right? All the growing up, all their experiences, everything is forgotten.
Right. And I think but I think God, like all goods, their remembrance is held in God. And there's a way in which, like, that in that conversation, I said this, and I think my intuition is right. It's like that the general resurrection is the ultimate act of remembrance, where it's like
Of remembrance.
everything, like all possible goods are remembered all at once.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's John Manley Hopkins' poem, the Leaden Echo and the Golden Echo, which I'm going to be talking about next month. And that whole notion there is that the only way to deal with what Sherry's talking about, which is that like everything decays and falls apart, is to trust that God will remember the beauty, your beauty.
Right.
It's
which brings us back to
give beauty back, beauty back to beauty.
Well, it's interesting.
Which brings us back to my wrestling with Kierkegaard. And I just now, by focusing on this concept of remembrance, I'm just now starting to understand where Kierkegaard is coming from. Because it is God's remembrance that Abraham is relying upon. That is what Abraham has faith in.
Yeah, that God will remember. Look, I'm trying to not see the institution of the Eucharist as this sort of like, there's almost like a divine pun in it. He says, "Do this in remembrance of me," and then he promises us that at the consecration, his body and blood, soul, and divinity will be present.
But here's the thing, though. Like, but it's perfect. It's perfect, though. It's perfect, though, because
it's so perfect.
Because in as
He's
much as we
remembered.
are remembering him, our humanity is being transformed into his humanity. So it's the remembrance is
That's
for our
going up
sake.
all sorts of levels.
It's
Yeah.
for our sake. The remembrance is for our sake. It is how
Yeah.
that remembrance, that act of remembrance is how the transformation is happening. Which is why when you say that the Eucharist is just a memorial, like if you even take the line about remembrance seriously, you don't know what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay, can we, shifting gears a little bit, I'm on my phone, so I can't find this. Would one of you be able to find Khalil Gibran's poem on comfort?
Yeah, I can do it.
Because, yeah, thank you, Sherry. And then when you do read it, it's been years since I've read it, but it's just been in the back of my head basically since the beginning of this. There's some lines about comfort in there that are just like, I think resonate really well with this
Is it
Dante's
called
notion. I mean,
Comfort?
because I can't remember.
The
Seriously,
best compliment I have ever received in my entire life. I went to a poetry workshop one time about, must have been 15 years ago. And actually, I remember what poem it was. I had one of my poems, Reflections in the Meat Department.
yes, you read that to me.
Yeah, I shared that at a poetry workshop like 15 years ago. And the poet who was teaching the workshop is like, yeah, I really love this poem. It's like, it reminds me of Khalil Gibran for some reason. I'm like, okay, I'll take that. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic.
Is it called On Houses?
Do you see the word hooks or meat hooks in there somewhere?
Let me see.
I think it's from the Madman.
Okay, let me look up. Hang on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I can't make it. I can't find it myself. Yeah, there's this. So I've got one other thing that I'd love if I can just like to intersperse this here. This is the first time where does he say this? I want to find his
Is
line.
it
He
on
says,
eating and drinking?
It
Well,
might
maybe
be.
we should just read that.
Just read that one. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just read that anyway.
Sherry, see what happens.
Okay, then an
See what
old
happens when you
man.
read it.
Then an old man, a keeper of an inn, said, "Speak to us of eating and drinking." And he said, "Would that you could live on the fragrance of the earth, and like an air plant be sustained by light. But since you must kill to eat and rob the newly born of its mother's milk to quench your thirst, let it then be an act of worship. And let your board stand an altar on which the pure and the innocent of forest and plain are sacrificed for that which is pure and still more innocent in man." This is a good one for you today. When you kill a beast, say to him in your heart, "By the same power that slays you, I too am slain, and I too shall be consumed. For the law that delivered you into my hand shall deliver me into a mightier hand. Your blood and my blood is not, but the sap that feeds the tree of heaven. And when you crush an apple with your teeth, say to it in your heart, your seeds shall live in my body, and the buds of your tomorrow shall blossom in my heart, and your fragrance shall be my breath, and together we shall rejoice through all the seasons. And in the autumn, when you gather the grapes of your vineyards for the winepress, say in your heart, I too am a vineyard for the winepress. I too am a vineyard, and my fruit shall be gathered for the winepress. And like new wine, I shall be kept in eternal vessels. And in winter, when you draw the wine, let there be in your heart a song for each cup, and let there be in the song a remembrance for the autumn days and for the vineyard and for the winepress. It's from the prophet. So that's not what you were thinking.
No, but I wonder if that's not the poem
No.
that the guy at the poetry workshop was thinking of when I shared Reflections in the
Was
Meat
thinking
Department.
of with yours.
Is that
Because
the one about
yeah, actually, I'll just go ahead and read it. I pulled it up. It's right here. This is called Reflections in the Meat Department.
Yeah.
Examining the factory processing cryovac remains of your scions in the meat department. Bending to test for flexibility. Not fully satisfied, but contemplating already what brines, rubs, or marinades to use this time. Which fruit and nut woods to wed with your rosy pink flesh. Struck quite unexpectedly by the unfairness of it all, we have both been brought low. Once we met in the dark wood, I armed with a spear, you with your razor sharp tusk, and an unconquerable will. You gave up your life to feed my village. We honored your death with a great feast. We offered up prayers to the gods that you would return, that we might meet again, but not like this. It was never meant to be like this. It is fated that neither you nor I will die in battle in this life, old friend, but I will wash your tender pink flesh and pat it dry ever so gently. Rub it with good olive oil, coarse salt, crushed fennel seed, and a little red pepper. Burn a fire of oak down to glowing embers. Give you a proper send-off, to honor you, to honor the gods. I pray for your return. Maybe in the next life, the cycle of history will permit us to meet once again on more honorable terms.
The great poem.
Dude, I love that. You haven't read that to me. No, you just talked about it.
I just talked about it without reading it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. No, my friend Brandon Sheard, who does he's the Thomistic butcher. I mean, he's brought these things up, this deep connection between like smoking meat and incense, right? That like there's this connection between, and then
yeah,
I think it was one of Pageau and Roland's conversations about the connection between the altar and the table.
Yeah.
Right? Between the altar and the table. And it's like you go to a high liturgical Eucharistic service and you're like, there's a table and there's like fire on it, and this food that feeds you comes out from it, and it's like decorated with, and it's like, you realize that thing going on and you're like, why do we just, I love this. Pageau's like, I think this is in Chino. He said, yeah, my wife just knows, oh yeah, you put candles on the table when we're all sitting down to eat. Like, that's just something you do. You just put candles on the table. It's like, why do we just like, we're going to eat, and so we should have fire, and then we should cut some flowers and put that on the table. Like, that's what you do when you eat
because
food.
Something has died every time we eat.
Yes, which I push back against Khalil's. I think there's so much apology in Khalil Gibran's notion of the dying of animals for us to eat, which for people who don't see the sacrifice there, like, think that might be the right response. But again, there's this sort of like, you can't speak exactly the way that he does without lowering,
which is why my poem
humanity.
actually my poem actually has a counterpoint to that, because it actually because it reflects what the actual belief of ancient peoples was, which is that it will return to us again.
Yes, yeah. And that there's a fulfillment for the beast in being given up to man. And so the response is not to feel guilty, but to live in such a way that it makes moral sense for you to eat animals. Like,
it's like that story that the Orthodox priest, that remember that lecture we heard a while back, or like it must have been about a year and a half ago. There was an Orthodox priest who was a missionary in Alaska.
He was married to a Native woman in Alaska.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he was married to a Native woman, and he was talking about how the Native people had this like story of like, basically the animals all felt sorry for us because we're so helpless and incompetent that they choose to give their lives.
Yeah. First Nations, almost all First Nations, at least in Canada, the ethic is that the animal, you can only kill an animal if it offers itself up to you. So any hunting that you do, anything that you kill, it offered itself to you. It gave its life for you. So the idea of sacrifice, is pretty fractal.
Which by the way is a good segue into reflecting upon why gluttony is a sin. Like, especially when you think about it of this context of like traditional cultures where food abundance was definitely not the norm. If you're eating more than your fair share of the kill,
there's a story
causing your neighbors to starve.
There's a story about Father. His name is Father Oleska. Ted, if you want to just
Father Oleska in Alaska.
In Alaska, and he's just amazing to listen to, because he does a lot of he tells I can't remember the name of the people, they're not Inuit, but he tells a lot of their stories, and then does a talk about that, right? But there's this one story, and it's absolutely about gluttony. So there's a grandmother and her grandson, and they're in their hut, and winter's coming, and they're starving, and the grandson is young. He's not really old enough to go out and hunt, but the grandmother can't. So she sends him out, And he waits and waits and waits for an animal to offer itself up, and nothing comes. And then a mouse shows up, and he kills the mouse. And he thinks, well, I can't bring this back to my grandmother. It's not even enough for the two of us. So I'll eat it, and then I'll be able to go out further. And so the animals successively get larger, and and he continues to just have this mentality that he's going to eat them so that he can bring more food to his grandmother, right? But he never seems to get there. Like nothing's ever big enough. And pretty soon he's eating whales, and huge things, right? And he turns into this giant human being, like
Blob.
mass.
Yeah.
And he goes back to the hut, but he's so big he can't fit in. And the grandmother hears him, and she says, "Is that you, grandson?" And he said, "Yes, grandmother, it's me." And she said, "Well, come in." And he said, "I can't, I'm too big." And she said, "Well, you have to straddle the hut and then jump up in the air and dive through the smoke hole." And then she holds her sewing needle right below the smoke hole, and he has to go through the eye of the needle.
Mhm. Martin Shaw retells this too.
Yeah.
So good.
It's such an incredible story. And yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, Father Alaska from Alaska.
I think it's worth bringing up too. One of Lewis's wonderful insights in the Screwtape Letters is his notion of gluttony not just being a matter of quantity, right? And because gluttony seems
Well,
to
it is a
fundament. I mean,
forgetting. It's a forgetting of the other, right? It's not a
yes, it's a
remembering.
forgetting. That's right. It's a holding up of food above other things, and so you can a glutton in relation to the people around you, which is bad enough, and then a glutton in relation to God, which is even worse. And so that's what fasting is supposed to cure us of, not of desiring food or loving food or enjoying food, but of just giving us a space where we can love God more than food, because it's really easy to love food. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about food for most people. I mean, I get that there are some people with eating disorders, but the vast majority of humanity, it's just food is not hard to love. It's very easy to love. And so, but then you can love it not just in terms of like, let me get as much quantity into myself, but to be ruled by. So there's this young man that we were friends with, and we got to know in college. Actually, what's wonderful, and here we go full circle. I met him because he was reading the Divine Comedy at a coffee shop, and I started talking with him about the Divine Comedy, and we struck up this friendship. And he one of the things that struck me was that he's kind of supporting himself, typical, like, probably like lower middle class families. He doesn't have a lot of disposable income, but he loved eating in restaurants so much that he lived in his car so that he could use the money that would have gone to rent towards eating in restaurants.
Wow. So
And it's like,
Ted, this is very, very interesting to me. And here's the thing. So back in the 90s, I worked on this, like my sister and I worked on this thing together where it was going to be a graphic novel. And the premise behind the graphic novel is that there was like a feminist takeover of hell, like Lilith and a crew of female demons like kicked Lucifer and the seven deadly sins out of hell, and they were forced they were forced to go to earth, and they were forced to live normal lives. The only thing that they kept about them that was special is that they kept the ability to tempt people toward whatever sin it was that they represented in a way that was almost supernatural, but otherwise they had to live normal lives, and they'd lost most of their powers. And the way I portrayed gluttony was actually as a gourmet chef. He was not. It was like so. It was like gluttony was making he wasn't just making crap.
yeah.
And
yes.
so yeah.
There's
a a sense of being overmastered by, well, okay, because that's sort of what it is. It's the saying, like, it is that imposition of what I looked for rather than what I'm given. And that's like, as a form of gluttony. I mean, right, with the night of faith that you're bringing up, right? There's this. Have either of you read Charles Williams' Arthurian cycle?
No,
No, I want to though.
I still haven't read
So
anything of his.
the Grail shows up, and there's a miraculous feast from the Grail. You know, and it follows Taliesin, the king's poet, which, as far as I know, no other. I don't think anyone's written an Arthurian cycle about Taliesin.
No.
And they're standing outside during this feast, and one of the other men asks, you know, to each man is given like the food that they most desire from the Grail, which is really interesting. And someone says, Tullius, and what did you receive? And he said, the food that was put in front of me.
Mm.
Like that's what gives you the capacity to feast and not to be Chiaco.
Okay, so here's a question, because when you're talking about this, I'm thinking about when I started to eat keto. And one of the things I noticed, that eating became less of an indulgence and more utilitarian. It was like, okay, I'm hungry now, I'm going to eat. And you could, it was like going to the gas station, you know, you fuel up your tank and then you're gone. And I said to my husband, it's really interesting because I don't feel like I'm eating with my eyes. They say that in Swiss, eh? Eating with your eyes. And because the thing looks good, so you just eat it, right? And in the poem here, he says, when you move again among the living, oh, speak my name to the memory of men. Having answered all, I say no more. So that's I can't remember the guy's name, but that's the guy.
Chaco.
Yeah, okay. And having answered all, I say no more. And giving his head a shake, he looked up at my face, cross-eyed, then bowed his head and fell away among the other blind souls of that place. So
yes,
he's talking about eyes in this relationship to this gluttonous avarice.
Well,
right?
look at my little honest moment earlier. It's like, what? It's not the food that at least the food that undoes me is not the food that I am. Like, it's not food that I'm eating with any joy. There's no actual joy in it. Like when I'm just like mindlessly eating chips while I'm sitting there watching a show with my wife, or if I'm rushing in and just grabbing something to stuff into my body because don't have time to cook and I have a busy work day. Like, those are the things that end up being destructive.
And
it's
what's
not,
so interesting,
it's not when I have time to make food with care and art and love, that is not the thing that's a problem.
Well, I just find it interesting that he that he slides cross-eyed in there, because that is not that is definitely specific. He's pointing at something.
Yes. So Sherry, here's what, like, when you're cross-eyed is when you're looking at something right in front of you. And the problem with gluttony is that you're looking down at something right in front of you. You're not looking, and I'm pulling a little bit more from the language later in the comedy.
Okay.
But like, the problem is that he's not looking up at heaven. That's the problem. God is, at the same time as being the thing closest to you, God is also the thing farthest from you.
But it says he looked up at my face, cross-eyed, and then bowed his head and fell away. So his eyes being crossed is indicative of the gluttony.
Yes.
And so it's like, the first thing that came to my mind is he doesn't see straight.
Yes, that's another way of saying it. Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think a lot about, like, so if you're driving or you're riding a bike or you're doing anything where you're going quickly, if you look at things right in front of you, or you look to the side or anything like that, then you can't go straight. The way that you go straight when you're driving or riding a bike or anything like that is you look way out in the distance where you want to go. Right? And so if you're trying to get somewhere and you look at what's right in front of you, you're just going to go all over the place. You're
Mm.
going to be responding reactively instead of, well, to take David's poem, if I had longed for my goal as the
Mm.
way these sinners
Yeah.
longed for their bowl, I wouldn't have to take this long night,
And what
this
is the goal
walk through
that
the
we
night.
should long for?
It's God. It's to be filled with God. It is to
Yeah.
be filled with God and made like him.
Yeah.
And so, because, well, I mean, when you formulate it like that, think about it. It's like they're not longing to be filled with God, they're longing to be filled with food. That's it. And then Nate, you were reading me
But
that thing
that's what
from
we're doing with every misdirected desire. It's like that's
And you talked about,
absolutely.
okay, so you talked
Absolutely.
about the altar and the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
but you were talking about it in terms of sacrifice. But when you were talking about it, I was thinking, well, that is what communion is. Like we actually feel the most communal when we eat together. That's why we invite people to
Yes.
eat with us, right? Because that is like, well, it's
do
a
you remember
base.
what M.L.
It's a
Bach
base.
says about the altar? What M.L.
No.
Bach says in his book on the Apocalypse of John, he says that every altar has always been a tomb, but it is only in the Christian tradition that it also becomes a table.
Oh, I've heard that. Yes.
Yes, and so
Mm.
I mean, it's never it's not lost on me that the Eucharist is communion.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that the altar is a table. And I think for early Christians, that's simply what the Eucharist was actually just eating together. And it is today, it is for centuries, has been on the Sabbath for Jews. Has been,
but who ate the food that was
together.
sacrificed? Like, this is true. Who ate the food that was sacrificed at the altar in all ancient cultures, including the Jewish culture? It's the priest.
The priest. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's how,
whereas in the communion,
the people fed them.
everyone shares in the meal.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, but the Sabbath table is that, though, Nate. Right.
Sure.
Like I remember one time I said that to the Sabbath meal. I said that in the Boxer. We were talking about sacred and mundane, and I said, home is where the mundane becomes sacred.
Well,
and when I said that, I was thinking about meals. I was thinking about communion.
Right. There has to be a deep connection between Shabbat and the Christian communion. Of course. Like, Jesus is a Jewish man. He's not choosing bread and wine as the elements of the communion at random and for no reason.
No.
Well, he's at the Passover meal. Nate.
Thank you, Sherry. Yes. It's like, what is
this is, yeah.
Sabbath, the Passover is what's held up as the prefiguring of Calvary. It's the Passover meal is the prefiguring of Calvary. You can't. So, someone just
said something about the Passover meal, then it was unleavened bread, which is certainly what the Catholic position is. The Orthodox don't necessarily agree, though.
That's above my pay grade to answer. I was just going to say, someone said something about the household being the place where the mundane becomes the sacred, and so the pilgrimage that I was on was the pilgrimage to the three hearts: the most sacred heart of Jesus, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and the most chaste heart of Saint Joseph. So, spending a lot of time reflecting on that, and the notion there is, right, thinking about the Holy Family, and in the household life being the thing that most in the household life. That's right, being the most clear figuration of the Trinity on this earth.
Yes, because and this is actually, it's fun. You need to go and watch the conversation that I had with Chris Green and Jed, because, and this is something I've said lots of times, not only in that conversation, but the church is the household of God. Like, yes. That's what it is. That's why you call your priest father. Mm-hmm. That's why you call your fellow parishioners brother and sister. It's not, those are not, there's nothing arbitrary about
and
that.
Who's the mother? Who's the mother?
The Blessed Virgin. The Blessed Virgin. Yeah. You go in there,
it's
and
all
there's
there.
you know, there's a picture of your mother right there to the
I love
left of the
love these
altar.
things. I call them all hidden in plain sight. There's
Mhm.
so much of that, like the symbolism,
Yeah.
in the church. It's just hidden in plain sight. People never they can never connect the dots, right? It's all everything just stands like as
But there's a level,
Einstein,
but there's a level, there's a
singular.
part of, I think there's, Sherry, I think there's a part of them that does know this though. It's just
Mhm.
that they just
The
need
mother,
help
the
being
father,
able
the brothers, and the sisters are sitting at the table and having what? Communion.
a family meal together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the prefiguration of eternity, by the way. And so, I mean,
Marriage
that's
feast. Yeah.
yeah, that's the let's say that's the failure of gluttony is to not see that food is a prefiguring,
Can,
is
can
to
I
see food as an end
can I
rather
just
than a
push my
prefiguring.
Christian anarchist agenda ever so slightly at this moment?
Just slightly.
Okay. So guess what the church is not if it's a household or a family? It is not a
A
state.
government.
It is not a
It's not a state.
polis. The polis is actually the ancient enemy of the family. Just saying. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I would say that the polis continues to be an enemy of the family, but there you go.
Oh, really? No kidding.
Yeah, something like that. Oh
Mm.
my goodness. Yeah, can I this is something that I've been dwelling on for a while and it should probably be a poem. Maybe it will someday. But I'm going to share it with y'all because I think it's beautiful. So he comes to this place. He sees Chaco. He says, and Chaco greets Dante, and then Dante says, "And perhaps the pain you suffer here distorts your image from my recollection. I do not know you as you now appear." And right, because Dante says, "I don't think I can recognize you because of how much pain is in your countenance." And I remember thinking this, I think it was at a checkout line somewhere. And there was someone who was not gifted with a lot of physical beauty ringing up my groceries. And I remember looking at them and thinking, there is probably, in fact, I would say certainly, an amount of joy that they could express on their face, such that they would be the most beautiful thing I had ever beheld with my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And it got me thinking because there's this notion that, and this actually comes back to Beatrice and something that I've been really wanting to bring up, which is why does the vision of Beatrice lead Dante into hell? And I think it's because, Sherry, what you were saying about how Dante the poet saw these people, he took people from his life and wrote about them.
Mm-hmm.
How can you see Chaco on the street and experience hell when you see him? Well, you can only do that if you have some vision of what a person could be. How
Yeah.
much glory and joy they could hold in them, because then you see hell in someone who's just about their meal, who just longs for their bowl. And so I was thinking about that working at the cash register, and I thought, to be in heaven and to be one of the blessed and to bring that kind of experience that Dante has with Beatrice you don't have to change any of the features of that person's face. They
No,
just
you don't, no.
if they were
So Ted,
they just have to be so full of joy. Like, to me, that was just such a radical realization. I was like,
Well, I
you
think
don't have to be
I think
changed.
that joy that you're talking about there is it's who they really are, right? It's their
Yes,
it's who they
right.
are, and
So,
that's the beauty of
yes.
of them. And the other
so
thing I wanted to say, wait, quick, Nate,
go for
before I
it.
forget.
I just have stories I need to tell.
Yeah, just real quick. I think it was Hans Urs von Balthasar that said that he would reorder truth, goodness, and beauty as beauty, goodness, and truth, because it's beauty, like in regards to Beatrice, right? It's beauty that leads us to truth and goodness, right? It's
Yeah,
beauty
it's what draws us.
it's what draws us in, and yeah. So anyway, I just want to say those two things.
It's what draws us in, yeah. But sometimes we're not able to see it where it really is. So Ted, what you said is on point, and I have been, for whatever reason, probably because I needed it, I have been gifted a few times in life where these moments where there's been a person who, for whatever reason, I viewed as disgusting, that God has granted me the occasion to see with his eyes.
Mm.
And people that I was initially experiencing with disgust, God has like shown me what this person looks like to him. And I have had this happen with a homeless guy who was bugging me on a bus when I was trying to read a book. And I have had this happen with a trans woman who was a barista at a coffee place I went to every day, who I interacted with all the time. And I'm like, this has happened a few times where it's like, oh, and then once, and it's just like it's just this moment, and it's like, first of all, it's weird because it's like my field of vision, it's almost like my entire field of vision, it's almost like there's like some kind of corona around my entire field of vision. Like there's just like this soft light at the edges of things. And it's like nothing objectively has changed about what's
Mm-hmm.
before me. Nothing has changed on any kind of like objective level. Like the features are still the same, everything is still the same, but but somehow it's like when you see it, the experience that you have when you see something that's like just that's truly beautiful and it moves you, it's like I am brought into that experience even though nothing about the appearance of the thing I'm looking at has changed. And I never forget those things, and it makes me stop anytime. So anytime I have that reaction of like anger or disgust at a person, it's like I try to bring myself back to those moments that God has granted me to see through his eyes.
I had
And
Because that's what
I
they're
have
that's
a
what they're for.
yeah,
I
right,
have a story.
exactly.
I have a story like that, but it's rather unpleasant, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I was in a place with a friend of mine when I was about 14 years old, and it was not a good place. And I was often in not very good places. And there were a lot of guys there, and they were a lot older. And anyway, I can't remember what happened. I think my friend had a big mouth, and she pissed some guy off, or I don't know, I think she mostly bruised his ego, and he threw her onto a billiard table and was about to rape her. And it was like go time, right? And I leaned in. His face was like this far from her face, and I leaned in just as close from the side. And he looked at me, and the first thing that I saw sent shivers down my spine because it was completely soulless, right? And cold and calculated and capable of murder. Like absolutely capable of murder. And then suddenly I saw this child, terrified. And it was like so stark. And I said to him, don't do this. This is not who you are. And he looked at me right at that moment, and he just got up and walked away. And we just, we buggered off really quick. but I actually saw a very terrified boy. That's what I saw at that moment. And then I knew that's who he was. And that's the only reason I could say what I said, because it was true. It was bizarre.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's a dark story.
It was a really,
Wow,
really dark
that's
story.
wild. That's wild, Sherry.
Yeah.
There's
I've seen
more.
some incredibly, like, reading through Dante. I mean, honestly, and I'm not saying this in any kind of boastful way, because I've seen some really dark things. Like I've seen people who have the capability to just wring your neck and walk away. I've seen that in their eyes. But I've also seen some amazing things. Like I was in a bus depot once with my sister because we were homeless, and we were cleaning up in the bus depot washroom, and there was a bag lady in there. Well, we used to call them bag ladies.
Yeah.
And she literally was a bag lady. She had garbage bags wrapped around and duct taped to her legs. Okay. Because it was winter and it was cold. And she was sitting there watching us. And I can't, for the life of me, I wish I could remember what she said to me, but she was a saint. Okay. She was literally sitting in a bus depot bathroom wrapped in garbage bags. And I remember looking at her and thinking, how is this coming out of her mouth? Like, none of this makes any sense to me. Whatever she said to me at that moment, I can't remember the words, impacted me and were so loving and so wise and so caring that none of it made any sense to me. The bags, the bus depot, you know, there were a couple prostitutes.
Sure wasn't
in there.
an
Like,
angel?
we were all washing up, right? And she was just sitting there watching us. And yeah. So like I've seen things, guys. Like I have seen. That's why I said, let's take Dante to his writing desk. Right.
Yeah. Well, so there was this funny moment a couple of weeks ago when I was on the open mic night with Father Eric, and we were talking about the Divine Comedy, because it always comes up when I'm talking. And Jacob Federucci was on, and he said something. He's like, I don't get why people, like, who is Dante that people like see him as this guy? And my only response was like, Dante was a poet. And so if you look at his poetry and it's true, you don't need anything else. I think it's Dante's capacity to see. I mean, to your point earlier, Sherry, about what a poet does, and you, Nate, your formulation of good poetry is like true poetry is witness.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. And my profound belief is that Dante, his experience with Beatrice, where he had that extended unveiling of glory as he perceived the reality of the glorified Beatrice, contemporaneous and coexistent with the earthly Beatrice, and of the same substance, but usually hidden. That experience, along with the gifts God gave him, is what allowed him to write the Divine Comedy. And here we are 700 years later, still being instructed and moved and formed by it. Because that's reality. What he saw in Beatrice was reality, and then to speak it with the kind of clarity that Dante did.
Well, it's incarnation, right? And this is how I feel. Like I really feel that people miss what incarnation actually means. Like when I looked into the face of the bag lady, I saw an angel.
And you might have as well.
And when I looked into the face of the guy, and when I looked into the face of the guy that I just mentioned, I saw a demon, right? Like we can see these things, and the poet sees them, and they draw them out and they show them to us. Yeah. And that's why Dante is important. Like I talked to Jacob about Dante one day because he said the same thing to me. And I said, I understand how you feel, because I misunderstood Dante, because there are people out there that use Dante as like scripture. And I think that's wrong, because Dante, to say that it must be real because Dante wrote it, or look, it's in the Inferno. So this, Dante's a poet and he's showing us something, and whatever it is he's showing us, we're missing probably about 80% of it.
Scripture is 70% poetry too, Sherry.
What's that?
Scripture is 70% poetry too. And I don't know if you remember that conversation I had with Yosef one time, but Yosef actually indulged me in my argument that it's actually 100% poetry.
Oh, nice.
And I
Yeah.
pointed to that because, and I pointed to that, like the thing that points toward it being 100% poetry is the way that the Torah is traditionally
Well,
chanted.
I
Like,
just read Addison Hodges Hart. He's been doing a series on the Gospels, and he did a thing on Matthew yesterday, where Matthew has like two blind men, where the other Gospels have one, and Matthew's got two donkeys, where the other Gospels have one, and I don't know. There's lots of this doubling up, and it was interesting because I had just watched a lecture by Rabbi Breitowitz, where he talked about these contradictions in the Bible, right, and how the contradictions are actually this coincidence of opposites that I was talking about before, right? That 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 point us into this towards the center, right? The middle path,
or
the middle way.
toward a synthesis, I would say. Like, to
Well,
me, like,
that's
yeah,
what he was getting at. That's what
yeah.
he was getting at, honestly. And so just think of, like, I've never thought of the Gospels as poetry, but if that's what Matthew's doing, which was very rabbinic in its nature, very Jewish, right? Um, then that Gospel of Matthew, at least, is also poetry.
I just love when we're surprised that the gospel writers were wrote in a Jewish manner. I'm like, they were all.
Yeah, and the more you understand,
Saint Luke was a Jew. Yeah.
the more you understand the way that these stories are given from a Jewish perspective, or the Jew or Judy, the tradition, the more sense it makes.
But
I
at
just
high
like,
mass,
so
we chant the gospel. They chant the gospel at high mass. Like, it's just like, it's all sung. All the scriptures sung.
this is completely, this is
Yes.
completely off track. But I kind of want to bring it up because we were just talking about some of our Jewish friends, and it's like, I just don't. I'm like, my wife is having a very hard time right now with
Yeah, I bet she is.
like um the the political global situation is weighing on her very heavily.
Yeah,
And
I thought of it when we read Dante.
and she's like, my wife is a lifelong, like so many American Jews, is a lifelong progressive Democrat who feels like deeply betrayed by her own in group in this moment. And she was sharing with me yesterday. We have a mutual friend. She's more, like, I know her now. She's probably my friend now too, but I've met her through my wife. Her name is Batsheva. She's Israeli, and she had family members that she found out died in the attack. And it was an aunt of hers, and um like, the body was so badly brutalized that they couldn't identify it. I mean, obviously they must have been able to use dental records or something to eventually identify it, because she knows her aunt died, but like, so it was not that just she was killed, but she was like killed in a particularly horrible and brutal manner. And we live in a very progressive community in Washington State, and she was mentioning to me yesterday that she was talking to her friend on the phone, and she said that Olympia, where we live, is the most anti-Semitic place she's ever been in. Um and my wife was like, kind of like not wanting to push back a little bit and not agree, because she likes it here in Olympia. And she tends to think the best of people, but she's having a very hard time. And I don't know what to say. Like, most of the time I don't even know what to say. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that, I mean, we have like a lot of Jewish friends in this little corner of the internet, and I just wanted to say that thoughts and prayers are with you, and it's very difficult, and I pray for justice and peace. So
Yeah. Let's long for those things more than the sinners and that circle along for their bowl.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Well, I've got to get out of here.
Yeah, I think
Help
that's
kill
a
some pigs.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good note to wrap up on. Thank you for joining me.
Well, I just want to say I'm glad you mentioned it, Nate, because it's been really burdening me ever since it happened, and I mourn for all those who are lost, but I also mourn for those who are losing something right now, like your wife.
Yeah.
Because it's that's going to include a grieving process. Any kind of loss
Yeah.
is the onset of a grieving process, right? Upon
No,
already grieving.
Yeah, that
You know?
and I can see it. Like
Yeah.
it's obvious that she is grieving right now. Like
Totally.
and so yeah. So I'm behind her
Prayers.
though, 100%.
Prayers for everyone who's suffering. Yeah.
And and I also want to say that it's like, and ultimately it's like, yes, I care about the well-being of Palestinian people and Palestinian Christians,
Of
as
course.
well as Palestinian Muslims as well. But I think we should, that there are I think there are double standards a lot of times. I'll just leave it at that.
There's a lot. I think everybody's getting a little bit of a stirring thanks to this right now. But I just wanted to read something from Dante, because this is what, when we read through this, it reminded me of what happened. I answered him, Chiaco, your agony weighs on my heart and calls my soul to tears. But tell me, if you can, what is to be for the citizens of that divided state, and whether there are honest men among them, and for what reasons we are torn by hate. And he then, after many words given and taken, after many words given and taken, it shall come to blood. White shall rise over black and rout the dark lord's forces, battered and shaken. Then it shall come to pass within 3 suns that the fallen shall arise, and by the power of one now gripped by many hesitations, black shall ride on white for many years, loading it down with burdens and oppressions, and humbling of proud names and helpless tears. 2 are honest, but none will heed them. Their pride, avarice, and envy are the tongues men know and heed, a babble of despair. When you guys read that this morning, that's what went through my mind.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, this is a
love. Yep, I gotta go. Love called me to the things of this world, to quote Richard Wilbur. So
that's nice. Absolutely. Well,
okay.
Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks for joining, Ted.
It's been a real pleasure. Yes.